My name is Scarlett Vance, and I was 27 years old when the one truth I had buried for a lifetime finally tore itself out of me. I had spent years pretending I had moved on, years convincing myself that childhood crushes weren't meant to survive adulthood. But when I saw him again, when his eyes met mine across that crowded hallway, every lie I had ever told myself shattered at my feet. And that was the moment I realized something terrifying. I had never stopped loving him, not even for a day. I hadn't seen Ethan Rose since we were 12. Since the summer everything changed. Since the day he left without warning, leaving behind only a half-finished letter and a promise neither of us was old enough to understand. I carried that letter folded inside my journals for years, then tucked inside drawers, then finally deep inside a box taped shut. But nothing, not time, not distance, not the life I built without him, had erased the ache he left behind. It lived in me like a quiet shadow, waiting. And now he was here, standing a few feet away. A man instead of a boy, taller, broader, older, yet somehow still holding the same softness in his eyes, the same unspoken sadness that made me want to reach out and fix everything for him, the way I tried to do when we were kids. My breath caught because it wasn't just recognition. It was the fear that he might recognize me too. Recognize the girl who never stopped waiting for an explanation. Recognize the woman who had never truly let go. I should have walked away. I should have turned around, pretended I didn't see him, preserved whatever was left of the armor I built over the years. But my feet were frozen in place, my pulse sprinting as if my body had known him before my eyes did. Ethan blinked slowly, like he was afraid I would disappear if he looked too fast. And then he whispered my name, Scarlett, with the exact same voice that used to call me from the oak tree behind our houses, the voice that felt like home before I ever knew what the word meant. That single word cracked open something inside me I had spent years trying to bury. Memories spilled out before I could stop them, of scraped knees and lemon popsicles, of whispered secrets and summer nights, of a boy who always walked beside me like he was protecting something fragile. Memories I had tucked away so tightly I thought they would dissolve with time. Instead, they came back sharper than ever, vivid, aching, and dangerously alive. I didn't answer him right away. Part of me was terrified that if I spoke, my voice would betray everything I still felt. Another part of me feared that he had changed too much, that the boy I loved no longer existed inside the man standing before me. And maybe the worst part, the part that made my chest tighten, was the thought that he might not feel anything at all. That to him, I was just a face from a childhood long forgotten. But his eyes told a different story. They were full of recognition, shock, guilt, and something else I didn't dare name. Ethan, I whispered back, my voice barely holding together. He took a step toward me and the world around us blurred. People passed by, conversations echoed, doors opened and closed, but none of it reached me. All I could hear was the sound of my own heart pounding against the past. I can't believe it's really you, he said. His smile trembled like he was afraid to let it form completely, afraid it might break. I've been looking for you for years. Those words nearly knocked the air out of me. Because if that were true, if he had really been searching, then why had he left in the first place? Why didn't he ever come back? Why did he disappear from my life like his existence had been nothing more than a dream I woke up from too soon? And why did hearing him say that still make something warm and foolish bloom inside my chest? I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay rooted in the present instead of slipping back into the memories rushing through me. Why now, Ethan? I asked quietly. After all this time? His expression faltered. Pain flickered across his face so quickly I almost missed it. Almost. But I knew him too well. Even after 15 years, I could always see through him. And whatever answer he was fighting to hold back, it wasn't simple. Because, he breathed, I owe you the truth. My stomach tightened. The truth. The same truth I had spent half my life imagining, rewriting, fearing. The truth behind his sudden disappearance. The truth behind the unfinished letter. The truth behind a boy who vanished and never said goodbye. Before I could ask what he meant, a voice called his name from behind him. A woman's voice, soft, familiar in a way that pierced something deep in me. Ethan tensed. His shoulders stiffened, and the warmth in his eyes dimmed just enough for me to feel it like a physical blow. He turned slightly, and the moment he did, my heart dropped. Because the woman walking toward him wasn't a stranger. She was holding a little girl's hand, and the little girl had Ethan's eyes. And just like that, everything I thought I wanted to hear from him became a question I didn't know if I wanted answered anymore. The little girl had his eyes, the same shade of warm brown that used to look at me from the other side of our back fence, asking if I wanted to run away and never come back. Only now those eyes were framed by long lashes and soft curls, and instead of mischief and scraped knees, they held a shy curiosity that made my chest tighten in a completely different way. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, sticky, too heavy for my lungs to handle. My heartbeat roared in my ears as my mind rushed to fill in all the blanks I never got answers for. While I spent years wondering where he had gone, wondering if he ever thought about me, he was out there building a life, a real life, one that clearly didn't include me. The woman walked up beside him with an ease I recognized instantly, the ease of someone who knew his rhythms, his silence, the way his shoulders relaxed just slightly when he was near someone he trusted. She gave him a small, tired smile before looking at me, and in that moment I realized she was beautiful, but not in the way that made me feel small or threatened. Beautiful in a simple, familiar way, like someone who had been through too much and learned how to hold herself together anyway. Her gaze flicked between Ethan and me, and I could tell she felt the tension hanging in the air, thick and unspoken. "Hey," she murmured, placing a hand on his arm. "Is everything okay?" His jaw flexed. For a second, he looked like a boy again, caught doing something he wasn't supposed to, torn between explanations that wouldn't make sense to anyone but him. Then he glanced at me, and the apology in his eyes was almost unbearable. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Yeah, I just ran into someone I used to know." Used to know. The word stung more than I was ready to admit. Used to. Past tense. Like everything we had shared was a childhood phase he had outgrown. Maybe that's what I was supposed to be. A phase. A memory. A chapter he closed so he could move on. But the problem was he had always been more than that to me. And now I stood there, face to face with the life he chose while I was still stuck in the one he left behind. The little girl pressed closer to his side, hiding a bit behind his leg while peeking at me with wide, fascinated eyes. Her fingers twisted into the fabric of his jeans, holding on as if he were the center of her universe. Something inside me twisted so sharply it almost made me wince. I wondered what it would have felt like if things had been different, if he hadn't disappeared that summer, if our story had been allowed to grow. Would I have been the one holding his hand in grocery store aisles looking up at him like that little girl was doing now? Or was that just another fantasy I had clung to, because the truth hurt too much? "I'm Mia," the woman said, extending a hand toward me with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "And this is Lily." I stared at her hand for a fraction of a second before forcing myself to move, to breathe, to act like a functioning human being instead of the ghost of a girl still waiting under an old oak tree. Her palm was warm and dry, grounding in a way I wasn't prepared for. "Scarlett," I managed. "Scarlett Vance." Her smile faltered just slightly at my name, like something about it rang a faint bell far in the back of her mind. She glanced at Ethan quickly, almost searching his face for context he wasn't giving. "Oh," she said softly. "Scarlett. I've heard that name before." My heart skipped. Ethan's shoulders tensed, and for a split second guilt flashed so clearly across his face that Mia didn't need to say anything else. There it was. Confirmation that I hadn't been completely erased. I existed somewhere in his story, even if I didn't know which chapter he'd placed me in. Lily tugged on his sleeve, her little voice barely above a whisper. Daddy, I'm tired. The word echoed in my head, stretching out longer than it should have. Daddy. The sound of it settled like a stone in my stomach. Of course. Of course he was a father now. A whole lifetime had passed since the last time I saw him. It would have been foolish to expect him to still belong to the same version of the world I did. Still, hearing it out loud made everything feel suddenly, tragically real. He knelt down to Lily's height with a soft smile that I recognized from 1,000 childhood afternoons. It was the same smile he used to give me when I cried over scraped knees or broken crayons, the same gentle patience he offered when I tripped over my own feet. Only now it was directed at someone else, someone who had his eyes and his whole world wrapped around her tiny fingers. I know, Bug, he murmured. We'll go in just a minute, okay? As he spoke to her, I couldn't stop watching him, the way his hand smoothed over her hair, the tenderness in his gaze, the care in his voice. It should have made me angry, jealous, bitter. Instead, all I felt was an aching kind of tenderness that hurt almost more than any rage would have, because he deserved to be loved like that. He always did. He was always the boy who gave more than he had, who protected everyone but himself. It just hurt that none of that had ever been mine. When he stood again, his eyes met mine, and for a moment the world narrowed down to that single line between us, stretched and frayed, but somehow still there. Scarlett, he said quietly, I really want to talk to you. Explain things. Can we? Mia shifted her weight slightly, her gaze flicking between us. She wasn't interrupting, but she wasn't entirely comfortable either. I didn't blame her. If I were in her position, watching some ghost from my partner's past appear out of nowhere, I'd feel uneasy too. You work here? She asked, trying to ease the tension. Is this your office? I nodded, grateful for the distraction and hating myself a little for it. Yeah, I manage events here, conferences, workshops, corporate stuff. My voice sounded too formal, too distant, like I was narrating my own life instead of living it. That's amazing, she said, and I could tell she meant it. We just moved back to town a few weeks ago. I told Ethan this place looked beautiful. I didn't know his past actually lived here. She laughed lightly, but the words carried a weight that made my chest tighten. His past. That was what I was now. A place he used to visit. A version of himself he used to be. I'm not going anywhere, I lied slowly, the words tasting strange in my mouth. If you want to talk, we can figure something out. We can... His expression softened, relief washing over his features like a wave. Thank you, he said. And I hated how much warmth bloomed in my chest just because he sounded grateful to me again. I'll call you, or we can meet somewhere. Soon, I promise. Promises. The last one he made me had been scrawled in messy handwriting on paper smudged with dirt and sweat and childhood. I'll come back for you, Scar. I swear. I carried that sentence like a sacred spell for years, long after it should have lost its magic. Long after the ink faded and the edges tore. And now he was standing in front of me, making another promise with the same eyes, the same quiet intensity. How was I supposed to believe him this time? How was I supposed to protect myself if I did? Mia wrapped an arm around Lily's shoulders as they turned to go inside. Ethan hesitated, looking at me one last time like he wanted to say something else but couldn't with them standing there. His lips parted, then closed again. Whatever words he had died on his tongue, and all that remained between us was silence. Bye, Scarlett, Lily said softly, surprising me. Her voice was small but clear, and for some reason it felt like being blessed and cursed at the same time. Bye, I replied, forcing a gentle smile that I hoped didn't show how cracked I felt inside. It was nice to meet you. As they walked away, I watched the three of them disappear down the hallway, the distance between us stretching with every step. The little girl swung their joined hands as she skipped to match his pace. Mia leaned in to say something, and Ethan's profile shifted, his mouth curving into a half smile. The sight carved something jagged into my chest. I stood there long after they were gone, surrounded by people and noise and fluorescent lights, feeling like I was 12 years old again, standing at the edge of our street watching a moving truck carry away my entire sense of home. I thought I had grown out of that version of myself. I thought I had outlived that heartbreak. But the truth was simpler. I had just gotten better at hiding it. The worst part was, I knew this wasn't the beginning of our story. It was a continuation of one that had never really ended. The real beginning had started years ago, long before we understood what love was. Back when we were just children running barefoot through backyards, trying to escape homes that were too loud or too quiet in all the wrong ways. As I finally turned back toward my office, my hands trembling slightly, a thought pushed itself to the surface of my mind, stubborn and insistent. If I was ever going to survive seeing him again, if I was ever going to understand what today really meant, I had to go back. Back to the beginning. Back to the summer he became more than my best friend. Back to the moment he went from being just a boy on the other side of the fence to the secret I would carry for the rest of my life. And I had no idea yet that the truth behind his disappearance would hurt more than his absence ever did. Porque the past we ran from never disappears. It just waits. And now, mine had finally found me. I was 8 years old the first time I realized Ethan Rowe wasn't just another kid in the neighborhood. I didn't have the language for it then. No one that young knows how to name the feeling of warmth hiding inside fear, or why a single person becomes the thread you hold onto when everything else feels like it's unraveling. But I remember the moment clearly, as if someone had carved it into my memory with careful, trembling hands. It was late afternoon, that golden hour when the sun hangs low and turns every ordinary thing into something soft and unreal. And there he was, standing at the other side of the weather-beaten fence that separated our yards, holding a baseball in one hand and my heart in the other without even knowing it. He looked at me like he wasn't sure whether to smile or run. His cheeks were flushed, his hair messy like he had been rolling in grass, and one of his sneakers was untied. He was shy in a way that didn't make sense to me then, shy like someone who already knew too much about disappointment. I didn't know until much later that his house was loud inside, full of slammed doors and empty apologies. But even before I understood any of it, I sensed something fragile in him. Something that made me want to be gentle. "Do you want to play?" he asked, holding the ball out like a peace offering. I didn't even like baseball. But something in the way he asked, carefully like he expected me to say no, made me nod before my mouth even caught up. And just like that, a line was drawn between us. Not in chalk or dirt or anything that could be washed away. It was drawn in the way his smile lit up like he hadn't seen a yes in a very long time. We spent the rest of that day throwing the ball back and forth until my arms ached and the sky turned orange. Every time I missed, he would run to get it for me, even when it rolled into bushes or down the slope by the driveway. Every time he missed, he would apologize like he'd done something terribly wrong. I didn't understand why he was sorry, but I knew I hated it. "You don't have to say that," I told him at one point, brushing dirt off my knees. "People miss. It's fine." He blinked at me with this wide, startled look, like no one had ever told him he was allowed to make mistakes. And maybe they hadn't. At dinner that night, I told my parents I made a new friend. My father grunted something without lifting his eyes from the TV. My mother smiled too hard, the kind of brittle smile she used to hide sadness. But neither of them asked Ethan's name. Neither of them cared who I was with or where I had been. They cared about other things, grown-up things, heavy things that had nothing to do with little girls or baseballs. So I slipped away after, sitting by my bedroom window and staring at the fence, wondering if Ethan was looking back. Maybe wondering the same thing. In the days that followed, he became the first constant in my life. We spent every afternoon together after school, making up games in the backyard, racing from tree to tree, climbing the old oak until our hands stung from the rough bark. He was faster than me, but always slowed down so I could win. I pretended not to notice. He pretended not to let me. We didn't talk about our families. Kids never do, not directly. But the silence between us sometimes said more than the words we didn't know how to use. I could always tell when he'd had a bad day. His laugh would sound smaller, like it had to squeeze past something tight and painful. He'd flinch when loud noises came from the street, and sometimes he would sit beside me under the oak tree, not touching, just close enough for his shoulder to brush mine, like he needed the reassurance of being near something steady. One afternoon, during the first week of summer break, he asked, "Do you think people can choose their families?" I was tracing shapes in the dirt with a twig, and his voice startled me. It wasn't the question itself. It was the way he asked it, quiet and trembling, like he already knew the answer and desperately wished he didn't. I hesitated, pushing the stick deeper into the ground. I think we can choose who we want to keep, even if they're not technically family. His breath hitched and he looked down at his hands. Then I choose you. The words were simple, childlike, unpolished, but something in them struck me like a tiny earthquake. I didn't know what it meant then. Not really. I just knew I felt something warm bloom inside my chest, something that made my throat tight and my heart beat a little too fast. He didn't look at me when he said it. He just kept pulling pieces of grass between his fingers, tearing them one by one like he was afraid of holding anything too tightly. From that day on, the oak tree became our place. We carved our initials into its trunk, promising each other we would always meet there before school, after school, on weekends, on days when the world felt too heavy. It became our anchor, our escape, the place where childhood stayed soft, even when everything else didn't. It was also where I realized I was in love with him. It happened so quietly, so gradually, I didn't notice until the feeling was already full-grown. He would smile and something inside me would flutter. He would laugh, and I would memorize the sound. He would brush dirt off my cheek with his thumb, and I would feel the world tilt. But I never told him. I couldn't. He trusted me with all the things he couldn't say. And I didn't want to risk losing that. Besides, we were just kids. Kids who didn't know love or loss or the weight of silence yet. Kids who thought summer lasted forever. Kids who had no idea that life was already preparing to tear us apart. One evening, just before the sky turned violet, his mother called him inside with a sharpness that made both of us jump. He stood, brushing grass from his shorts, his eyes flicking nervously toward the house before looking back at me. "Can we meet tomorrow?" he asked. "We always meet tomorrow," I said, trying to sound light, but something about his face made my stomach twist. He nodded slowly, then stepped forward and pressed something into my hand. A folded piece of paper, wrinkled and warm from his palm. "Don't open it until you get home," he whispered. I didn't understand why he looked scared. I didn't understand why his voice sounded like goodbye. I didn't understand why the oak tree suddenly felt colder, larger, emptier. But I would. By morning, I would understand too well, because that was the last day I saw him as a child. The day before he disappeared. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake with the folded paper under my pillow, pressing my fingers against it every few minutes like it might vanish if I didn't keep it close. I told myself I was just excited, just curious about whatever Ethan had written. But deep down, even if I didn't yet understand how to name the feeling, I knew something was wrong. Children feel storms before they arrive, even when the sky is still clear. And that night, everything inside me felt like the air right before lightning breaks it open. The next morning, I rushed to the oak tree before breakfast, the letter still tucked inside my pajama pocket. I hadn't read it yet. I wanted to read it under the branches where he'd given it to me, where every important thing between us existed. I sat at the base of the trunk, pressing my back against the familiar grooves, waiting for him the way I always did. The sun warmed my knees. The air smelled like cut grass. Everything looked normal. But Ethan didn't come. At first, I told myself he was just late. Maybe he overslept. Maybe his mom made him eat breakfast before coming out. Maybe he was looking for the baseball we'd lost the day before. I counted the minutes, then I counted them again. Each one stretched longer, heavier, until the morning light shifted and shadows began creeping across the yard. By the time an hour passed, I felt the panic rising in my throat like something alive. I walked to the fence, pressed my fingers between the slats, and called his name. "Ethan!" My voice cracked. I tried again. "Ethan, come out!" Silence. No footsteps. No laughter. No rustling noise of him crashing through bushes like he always did when he was rushing to meet me. Just silence. I squeezed through the opening in the fence, a secret gap we had discovered the first summer we became friends, and hurried into his yard. The air felt wrong the second my feet touched his grass. Heavy. Still. As if the world was holding its breath. There was a moving truck in the driveway. I froze, my heartbeat slamming so hard against my ribs it felt like something might break. Men were carrying boxes out of the house, stacking them with mechanical indifference inside the truck. The front door was wide open, revealing glimpses of empty rooms that had once echoed with footsteps and shouted arguments. Now the house looked abandoned, hollow, stripped of everything except the faint smell of dust and endings. His mother was standing near the porch, her arms crossed tight over her chest. Her face looked tired, sharper somehow, like she had aged 10 years overnight. She didn't see me at first. But when she did, something flickered across her expression. Not tenderness, not recognition. Something closer to guilt. "Mrs. Rowe?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Where's Ethan?" She blinked, surprised. Maybe she thought I wouldn't notice. Maybe she hoped he'd slip away without saying goodbye to anyone, especially me. "Scarlett," she said slowly, brushing her hair back with a shaky hand. "You should be at home. We're leaving today." Leaving? The word felt foreign in my mouth. Wrong. Too big to fit inside my understanding of the world. "But he didn't tell me. He didn't say, he didn't—" My throat clenched around the rest of the sentence. She looked away. It was sudden. Everything inside me shattered. Sudden meant unplanned. Sudden meant he hadn't known the night before. Sudden meant the fear I saw in his eyes wasn't my imagination. I thought of the paper he'd given me, the way he'd told me not to read it until I was home, the sadness in his voice, the way he'd held on to the moment like he was already grieving it. "Can I see him?" I asked, stepping closer. "Please. I need to say goodbye." Her jaw tightened. She hesitated, her gaze darting toward the truck like she was afraid someone might overhear. Then she shook her head. "He's not here. His father took him early this morning." It felt like someone had pulled the ground out from under me. "But he wouldn't leave without saying goodbye," I whispered. "He wouldn't." Her expression softened, but not in a comforting way. More like the kind of softness people use when they're delivering a truth they know will hurt. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. There wasn't time. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run into the house, tear open every door, search every corner until I found him hiding with his hands over his ears like he did when things got bad at home. I wanted to believe that if I shouted his name loudly enough, he would come sprinting out from somewhere, breathless and smiling, telling me this was all a mistake. But deep down, I already knew better. He was gone, truly gone. His mother reached out as if to touch my shoulder, but let her hand fall away at the last second. "You're a sweet girl, Scarlett," she said quietly. He talked about you a lot. That only made it worse." I stumbled back, my eyes burning, and ran toward the fence before she could say anything else. I didn't stop to breathe, didn't stop to think. I squeezed through the wooden slats and collapsed under the oak tree, where the grass felt cold against my skin even in the summer heat. My hands shook as I pulled the folded paper from my pocket, the one piece of him I had left. I opened it with trembling fingers, my vision blurring as I tried to read the messy handwriting I knew by heart. "Scar, I don't know what's happening, but Mom said we might leave. If I go, I promise I'll come back for you. I swear it. Don't forget me. Ethan." The letter ended abruptly. No explanation. No goodbye. The last line was smudged like his hand had been shaking when he wrote it, or like he'd been crying. I pressed the paper to my chest and curled into myself, trying to hold on to the last pieces of a world that had changed in a single morning. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment everything inside me shifted. The moment love became loss. The moment childhood ended. I didn't tell anyone about the letter, not my parents, not my teacher, not even my diary, which held every other secret I'd ever had. I kept Ethan inside me like a promise bound with invisible thread, part memory, part hope, part wound. And the worst part was, I didn't know yet that he hadn't left by choice, or that the truth behind his disappearance was darker than the silence he left behind. But I would learn. Years later, when everything in my life finally came undone, I would learn. I didn't expect to dream about him again. Not after seeing him in the flesh. Not after watching a little girl with his eyes tug at the sleeve of the man I used to know. But that night, Ethan returned to me exactly the way he had when we were children. Barefoot in the grass, hair falling into his eyes, hands ink-stained from the note he never finished writing. Only now, when I reached out to touch him, he faded into light and guilt and distance all at once. And I woke up with the same ache I used to carry as a child, clutching at bed sheets instead of the promise he left behind. For a moment, lying in the quiet of my apartment, I thought about pretending nothing had happened, that our encounter at the conference hall had been nothing more than a coincidence, a brief collision between two lives that should have stayed separate. But the truth was heavier than denial, and when the morning sun slipped between my curtains, it illuminated the one certainty I couldn't outrun. I needed answers. Not the childish ones I once begged the universe for, but the real ones, the ones adults bleed for. I checked my phone out of habit, not expectation. But there it was, his name, glowing on my screen like a ghost refusing to fade. Ethan Rowe. Can we talk tonight? Please. I owe you more than what I said yesterday. My heartbeat stuttered, unsure whether to race with anticipation or dread. I must have read the message 10 times, searching for hidden meanings in the plainness of the words. Maybe I wanted him to beg. Maybe I wanted him to hurt the way I had. Or maybe I just wanted a place to put the years of longing and resentment I'd carried like stones in my pocket. I typed a reply, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Everything sounded either too eager or too cruel. In the end, I settled on something simple. Me. Okay. Where? His response came fast. Too fast. Ethan, the oak tree, the old one, behind our houses. 6 p.m.? My breath caught. The oak tree. Our oak tree. The place where he told me I was the family he chose. The place where I waited for him until my mother dragged me inside after sunset, telling me to stop crying over things I couldn't change. I hadn't been there in years. Not since I was a teenager trying to let go of a boy who didn't come back. I almost said no. Almost told him the past was buried for a reason. But something inside me, something stubborn and fragile and still 12 years old, wouldn't let me. Me. 6 p.m. is fine. As soon as I hit send, nausea twisted inside me. There was no going back. Whatever truth he owed me, whatever story he had kept hidden for 15 years, I was finally going to hear it. And I wasn't sure if any part of me was prepared. The day passed in a blur of half-lived moments. I tried to focus at work but found myself staring at my phone, rereading our messages, imagining every possible explanation he might give. None of them felt big enough to justify the hole he left. None felt painful enough to match the abandonment. And yet a small, traitorous part of me wanted to believe he had suffered too. Wanted to believe I hadn't been alone in my heartbreak. At 5:30, I left the office early, claiming an excuse even I didn't believe. The drive to our old neighborhood felt surreal. Streets that once held my entire world now felt smaller, quieter, worn by time. The houses had new paint, new owners, new memories filling their rooms, But the moment I turned onto our old block, the past rushed toward me so quickly I had to pull over for a breath. The oak tree was still there. Older, taller, its roots wider and deeper than when we carved our initials into the trunk. Time had thickened it, strengthened it, turned it into something ancient and unmovable. I stood beside it, running my fingers over the rough bark where our letters once lived, now almost swallowed by growth. It felt like touching a scar, one that had healed on the surface but still ached underneath. I didn't hear Ethan at first. Not until the crunch of gravel behind me made my shoulders stiffen. I turned slowly, my breath lodged somewhere between my ribs and my throat. He stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, chest rising and falling too fast. He looked older in the late afternoon light, shadows carving deeper lines around his eyes. But he looked softer too. The anger and confusion of childhood replaced by something more complicated. Something like regret. "Hey," he said quietly. I nodded. "Hey." We stood there for a while, letting the silence settle between us. It didn't feel empty, it felt full. Of memories, of questions, of 15 years of unsaid things pressing against both of us. "You came," he finally murmured. "You asked." He swallowed, his gaze drifting to the oak tree. "I didn't think you'd ever want to see me again." "I spent years wanting to," I admitted, the confession slipping out before I could stop it. Then I spent more years trying not to. His eyes met mine, and something raw flickered through them. "Scarlett, I'm sorry. For everything. For leaving. For not saying goodbye. For not coming back sooner." The apology hung there, fragile as glass. But apologies were easy. Explanations weren't. "Why did you leave?" I asked, my voice barely louder than the breeze. He looked away, jaw tightening. "Because I didn't have a choice." I stepped closer, anger and grief rising like a tide I'd held back too long. "You could have written. You could have called. You could have—" "I wasn't allowed." His voice cracked on the last word. "Not allowed?" I repeated, confusion twisting into something sharper. "By who?" He didn't answer right away. His breath trembled, and he pressed his hand to the tree trunk like he needed its strength to remain standing. And when he finally looked at me again, his eyes weren't just sad. They were terrified. "Scarlett," he whispered, "there are things you don't know about my father. Things I should have told you back then. Things that kept me from coming back." A chill crawled up my spine. Fear. Doubt. Recognition. "Ethan." "What did he do?" He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. The truth was fighting its way out of him like something that had been buried too long. Finally, he said it. "My father didn't just take me away." He paused, breath shaking. "He was running from something, and he made me run too." And before I could ask what that meant, before I could make sense of the terror in his voice, a shadow moved behind him, a silhouette I recognized too late. The shadow behind him stretched across the ground before my mind could make sense of it. Something about the shape, broad shoulders, rigid posture, the slow, heavy way it moved, triggered a memory so old I didn't recognize it at first. Not until Ethan stiffened. Not until his breath caught like a child's frightened gasp trapped inside a grown man's body. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. I saw it in the way his hands curled into fists, in the way his eyes darted to mine, wide and warning, in the way he whispered a single word under his breath, one I hadn't heard him use since we were kids hiding behind bushes when the neighborhood boys picked fights. "Run." The syllable barely formed before the figure stepped into the fading light, revealing a face I hadn't seen in 15 years but had somehow always feared. Deep wrinkles carved around a mouth that never learned how to soften, eyes darkened by something colder than anger. A man built from hard choices and harder consequences. Ethan's father. I felt the air leave my lungs, sharp and sudden, as if the atmosphere had changed around us. He wasn't supposed to be here. Ethan had said nothing about him. He had looked relieved when he mentioned having moved back to town. Relieved, because he thought his past wasn't following him anymore. He was wrong. Didn't expect to find you here, the man said, his voice gravel scraping over concrete. His gaze flicked to me. Studied. Measured. And something in his eyes, recognition maybe, made my skin crawl. Ethan stepped between us instinctively, positioning himself like a shield. Dad, go home. His father's laugh was low and humorless. You think you can give me orders now? I'm not a kid anymore. Ethan's voice trembled, but his stance didn't shift. And you don't get to show up whenever you want. His father's jaw twitched. A subtle movement, but one that made my heart pound because I had seen that twitch before. On a man losing his patience. On a man ready to lash out. I told you not to come here. His father growled. You don't tell me what to do. Ethan shot back, louder than I expected. Not anymore. A dangerous silence stretched between them. The kind that hums in the air before lightning strikes. I took a step back without meaning to, and Ethan noticed. He reached for my wrist, squeezing gently, grounding me. It's okay, he whispered. I won't let him hurt you. But the moment he said it, his father's head tilted. Slowly, like an animal catching scent. Hurt her? He repeated. Boy, the only one about to get hurt here is you. The threat wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It landed like a blade pressed against the throat of a memory. Stop, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. Please, this has nothing to do with me. His father looked at me again, really looked this time, and something flickered behind his eyes. Calculation, recognition, a memory pulling itself out of a long-buried place. You're the Vance girl, he said. My breath froze. He remembered me? Ethan's grip tightened. Leave her out of this. But his father ignored him, always hanging around our fence, always dragging my boy into trouble. That wasn't trouble, Ethan snapped, voice shaking with anger. She was my friend. That, his father said, jabbing a finger toward him, was the problem. Ethan flinched, not because of the gesture, but because of the truth inside it. The realization flashed across his face like a wound reopening. He took you away because of me, I whispered. Ethan closed his eyes, just for a second. But it was enough. Enough for me to know the truth. Enough for his father to smirk. And enough for my world to tilt. He didn't want you near her, his father said. Didn't want you getting soft. Didn't want you clinging to some little girl who couldn't save you. Save me from what? I asked, my voice cracking. Ethan looked stricken. Scarlett, don't. Tell her, his father interrupted, stepping closer. Tell her why you ran. Tell her what you were really hiding from all these years. Ethan's breathing grew unsteady, his eyes darting between me and the tree, as if the past itself were crowding in around us. For a moment, he looked 12 again, terrified and small. But then he exhaled, long and shaky, and something hardened in his jaw. No, he said. Quiet, but firm. She doesn't hear it from you. His father laughed. You think you can protect her from the truth? I can try. You failed at protecting everyone else. The words landed like a slap. Ethan's entire body jolted. I stepped forward. What is he talking about? But Ethan didn't answer. Couldn't. His father took one more step toward us, and something in Ethan snapped. He grabbed my hand, pulling me back, almost stumbling in his urgency. Scarlett, go, he whispered fiercely. Please. I'll explain, just not here. I shook my head. No, I'm not leaving you again. His father smiled, slow and cruel. She's stubborn, just like her mother. I froze. My mother? I whispered. What do you know about my— But he didn't finish, because at that moment, Mia's voice suddenly echoed from the path behind us. Ethan, I've been calling you. Oh my God. What's going on? She stood there holding Lily's hand, her face pale, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. The tension, the fear, the man she clearly didn't expect to be here. Lily clung to her leg, staring at her grandfather with confused, frightened eyes. "Dad," Ethan breathed, his voice breaking. "Don't do this. Not in front of them." His father's smile widened, stretched by bitterness. "Maybe it's time everyone hears the truth." A tremor went through Ethan, through me, through all of us. Because whatever truth he meant to unleash, it wasn't just about Ethan. It wasn't just about me. It was about both of our families, and the secret that tied us together deeper than childhood ever could. Ethan stepped forward, blocking his father with a trembling courage I had never seen in him before. "You don't get to speak for me anymore," he said, voice breaking. "Scarlett, the truth is, he didn't take me away because of you. He took me away because of what he did." His father's jaw tightened, but Ethan kept going. "That night, he hit my mom, hard. I tried to stop him. He dragged me into the car before the neighbors called the police. He told me if I ever contacted you, he'd hurt you too." My breath shattered. The world dimmed around the edges. Ethan turned to me, tears slipping down his face. "I didn't leave you. I was hiding you, protecting you." I reached for his hand, feeling 15 years of silence melt between our fingers. Mia watched with quiet devastation, realizing she had known only pieces of the man she loved. Lily clung to her father's leg, sensing the weight of what neither of us could carry alone. His father stepped back as police sirens approached. Mia must have called without us noticing. For the first time, the man looked small, defeated, human. As officers led him away, Ethan whispered, "I'm sorry for every year you waited." I shook my head, resting my forehead against his. "I didn't wait," I whispered. "I just never stopped loving you." He closed his eyes, breathing me in like a prayer finally answered. And under the old oak tree, older, worn, and still standing, we chose each other again. This time not as children, but as two broken hearts finally finding the courage to heal in the same place where they first learned to hope.